They were supposed to be stories of love. One, a honeymoon getaway on a private island resort where champagne flowed under golden sunsets. The other, a quiet woman's retreat into a rural town in the heart of Oregon, where mountain winds carried whispers through pine trees. But within days, both women were dead. The island was called Everwind Cay, a secluded gem off the coast of Florida known only to the wealthy and the discreet. Accessible only by private boat or seaplane, it welcomed just 12 couples at a time. The promise, absolute paradise. No phones. No interruptions. Just crystal-clear waters, personal chefs, and miles of untouched beach. For Lauren Kim, 35, a clinical pharmacist from Seattle, it was the dream honeymoon destination she had planned since she was 20. Smart, soft-spoken, and fiercely independent, Lauren had spent years pursuing both her career and her passions, baking, animal rescue, and travel. She was the type of person who remembered your dog's name even if she'd only met it once. She had met her husband, Ethan McConnell, 39, just over a year before. A systems analyst at a nonprofit working with foster youth, Ethan had seemed kind, passionate, and funny in all the right ways. They bonded over early morning runs and shared playlists. Lauren's friends were surprised by how quickly things escalated, but they smiled through the wedding, held on a snowy February evening in Seattle with only 20 guests and an impressive cake that Lauren had insisted on baking herself. They left for Everwind Cay in July, promising postcards, ocean selfies, and uninterrupted bliss. But on the morning of July 10th, Lauren didn't show up for breakfast. The resort staff noticed but didn't worry, not yet. "Do not disturb" sign hung on the door. It wasn't until lunch that someone grew concerned. A guest in a nearby villa mentioned hearing shouting the night before. The butler knocked. No response. He used a master key. Inside, the suite was silent. And then it wasn't. Blood smeared across the tiled bathroom floor. A shattered mirror. A toilet lid cracked in two. And Lauren's body, bruised, broken, crumpled between the sink and wall. Ethan was gone. His phone, wedding band, and a GPS watch were found tossed near a palm tree by the beach. But his passport and wallet had vanished. He had left without shoes, according to a resort worker. No security footage showed him leaving by boat. There was no kayak missing. Just silence. And a dead woman who had dreamed of forever. News of Lauren's death hit Seattle like a fist. Her co-workers at the pharmacy cried openly. Her parents were inconsolable. The wedding photos still hung in their living room. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in Oregon, another discovery was unraveling. Nestled in the forests of the Rogue River-Siskiyou region, a recreational drone operator was flying a camera drone over a rarely used hiking trail near Bald Butte. His drone had malfunctioned twice that morning, each time crashing into the same clearing. Frustrated, he hiked in to retrieve it. That's when he saw what looked like a discarded Halloween prop. But it wasn't a prop. It was a partial human skeleton. Limbs missing. Clothes absent. Buried under weeks of pine needles. Exposed only by a recent rainstorm. The police were called. A forensics team arrived. The bones, it turned out, belonged to a petite woman, likely in her late 30s or early 40s. No identifying documents. No jewelry. No phone. But there was one clue, a partial set of dental work, specifically high-end veneers, and a molar with a unique gold inlay. It was the kind of dental work you didn't get in rural Oregon. This was moneyed work. Someone had loved their smile once. The local sheriff cross-referenced missing persons. One name floated up, Diane Monroe. 41, a mother of 3. Last seen 2 months prior in Grants Pass. Her husband, a goat milk delivery driver named Paul Monroe, had reported her missing 10 days after she vanished. His reason for the delay: she disappears sometimes. Comes back. When asked if Diane had any dental work done, Paul wasn't sure. But a small plastic pharmacy bag found in her vanity drawer led detectives to a private dental clinic in Ashland. The dentist confirmed the match in less than 5 minutes. Diane Monroe was dead. Her hands and feet were missing. Blunt force trauma to the skull. No clothes. Buried shallowly under a clearing often used for stargazing. As investigators began to unravel her life, A second man came into view. Jackson Reese, 45, a construction mogul turned philanthropist known for his presence in Oregon's real estate boom. He had been photographed multiple times with Diane at charity events. Diane's children referred to him, disturbingly, as Uncle Jack, a name that had started showing up more and more around the house. From there, things spiraled. Diane had become involved in multi-level marketing. She had joined high society groups in Medford and Portland. And Reese, wealthy, persuasive, and already married, had fallen into the perfect role of seducer. It wasn't just an affair. It was an escape hatch. A way out of her financially stagnant life. But that escape would cost her everything. 2 women. One buried in sand, the other in soil. One on a honeymoon. One seeking a new life. Both silenced in brutal, intimate violence. And both had believed so deeply in the wrong man. But the truth always leaks. Through blood. Through bone. Through the lies left in suitcases and under manicured trails. This was just the beginning. Before the crime scenes. Before the broken bodies and shallow graves. There were smiles. Laughter. Promises. Lauren Kim had been the kind of woman who believed in effort. Effort in love. Effort in career. Effort in friendship. Born and raised in Seattle to Korean-American parents, she was their only daughter, soft-spoken yet driven, graceful yet grounded. She had a knack for knowing exactly what someone needed and getting it for them before they even asked. Whether it was a handmade cake on a friend's birthday, a custom skincare set for her mom, or free pharmacy advice for the elderly neighbor 2 floors down, Lauren gave. Boys. But she wanted something back too. Not gifts. Not flattery. She wanted someone who could hold their own weight beside her, someone to share the life she worked so hard to build. And for a while, Ethan McConnell seemed to be that man. He entered her life at a charity 5K, just after the pandemic subsided. Tall, charming, with that low-key sarcasm that Lauren found refreshing. They bonded over running, dogs, and playlists of 2000s indie rock. He worked in tech but said his real passion was helping kids. He worked for a nonprofit that supported foster youth in Memphis before moving to Seattle. It sounded noble. Purposeful. Just like her. 3 months in, he brought up marriage. 6 months in, she said yes. Lauren's friends were skeptical. Not because Ethan did anything blatantly wrong. He was polite, on time, respectful. But there was something off, an emotional flatness, a strange way of dominating conversations with long silences instead of words. When they spoke to Lauren, she dismissed their worries. "We just communicate differently," she'd say. What no one knew at the time was that Ethan had been married before. In fact, he was still finalizing his divorce when he first met Lauren. The previous marriage, also brief, had ended with vague terms, irreconcilable differences, the court documents read. His ex-wife had left no public trace. No interviews. No blog posts. Just a name, Melissa Deed, on a record buried in Tennessee family court archives. Lauren never saw the red flags. Or perhaps she did but chose to ignore them. After all, she had a honeymoon to plan. And Everwind K had been her dream since her pharmacy school days. Across the country, Diane Monroe had been living in a very different reality. Her world wasn't made of sea breezes and silk robes, but goat milk deliveries, school pickups, and coupon clipping. She lived in rural Grants Pass, Oregon, where her days revolved around her 3 kids, her husband Paul, and trying to stretch a single income far enough to afford internet, gas, and school supplies. She wasn't unhappy, exactly. But she wasn't fulfilled either. At 41, Diane felt like her life had become a series of sacrifices that no one noticed. She had been the PTA president, the carpool driver, the birthday cake baker. She gave up her part-time job at the bookstore when the second child was born. Gave up book club when the third arrived. By the time her youngest entered kindergarten, she realized she had no idea who she was outside of being mom. So when she was introduced to a multi-level marketing company selling luxury home goods, she jumped in. Not because she believed in the products, but because it gave her something to own. Something that was hers. That's where she met Jackson Reese. He was unlike any man she'd ever known. Flashy, confident, oozing self-assured charm. He was 44, ran his own construction company, and drove a different SUV to every meeting. He had a trophy wife and a son in boarding school. But when he looked at Diane, she felt seen. It started with coffee. Then came the expensive gifts. Then came a hotel room in Portland. Before long, they were inseparable. Reese promised everything. A new life, a condo in Ashland, tuition for her kids, a clean break from her boring past. He told her his wife was sick, that divorce was on the horizon, that everything was just a matter of time. He made her believe that she deserved more, and that he was the only one who could give it. And Diane believed him. Back in Seattle, Lauren had just finished baking 200 custom cookies for her wedding guests. She was exhausted, but she didn't mind. She texted Ethan a picture of the cookies, shaped like seashells and seahorses with the words K+E forever, etched in blue frosting. He didn't reply for 6 hours. When he did, it was just, cool. Still, she carried on. She chose the most expensive suite at Everwind K. She wrote handwritten vows. She planned to surprise him with a scrapbook of their first year together. She didn't know that he had visited that same resort before, with his ex-wife. In fact, the staff still remembered him. But no one said anything. Wealthy guests often returned. No one asked why. In Oregon, Diane had begun arguing more with Paul. She no longer made dinner. She started coming home late, making excuses. Her kids, confused by the sudden shift, began asking questions. Paul, quiet by nature, didn't confront her, not until he found an unfamiliar men's watch on the kitchen counter. They argued that night. Loudly. One of the neighbors recalled hearing something break. Diane stormed out before dawn, claiming she was going for a drive. She never returned. Paul waited 10 days before reporting her missing. When asked why he delayed, he simply said, "I didn't know if she wanted to be found." By the time the police connected her to the bones on Bald Butte, Diane's trail had already gone cold. But Jackson Reese's hadn't. Detectives discovered text messages, voicemails, photos, receipts, GPS data, and eventually, a shovel, with her blood still embedded in the grain of the wood. As for Ethan, he was located 36 hours after Lauren's body was found, wandering barefoot and dehydrated on a nearby mangrove island. His hands were scraped, his shirt stained. He was muttering to himself when a local fisherman found him. When asked what happened, Ethan simply said, "We had an argument. I left to clear my head." He didn't mention the blood, or the broken mirror, or the body. 2 women. One promised forever. One promised escape. Both found the opposite. In the coming days, the investigations would pull back every layer, digging through browser histories, financial records, past relationships, and hidden truths. The question now wasn't whether someone had died. It was whether either of them had ever truly been loved at all. Before bodies were found and arrests made, there were moments. Moments when things could have changed, if someone had paid closer attention. If the signs hadn't been brushed off as ordinary tension. If love hadn't been so blinding. Lauren Kim and Ethan McConnell had arrived at Everwind K 3 days earlier. Their suite, Villa No. 9, overlooked a crescent bay of turquoise water, framed by white sand and dense palm trees. It was the most secluded villa on the island, marketed for couples seeking complete privacy. On the surface, they were a happy pair. Resort staff remembered seeing them holding hands on the dock, taking photos near the hammocks, ordering the signature seafood platter at the private dining hut. But something had shifted by the second night. According to one of the servers, Lauren had dined alone at the beach bar that evening while Ethan lingered at the main lodge, drinking with 2 other guests. She had looked uneasy, barely touched her food. When the server asked if she wanted to bring anything back to her husband, she simply said, "He'll come when he's ready." Later that night, a neighboring couple reported hearing raised voices from Villa No. 9. Something about a lie. Something about another woman. Then came a loud bang. Then silence. It wasn't enough to alert anyone at the time. People argue, especially when alcohol's involved. But looking back, everyone wished they had knocked. 1,000 miles away in Oregon, Diane Monroe sat in her car outside Jackson Reese's Ashland condo. She had been sitting there for 27 minutes, according to her call logs, flipping between apps and a drafted text message she couldn't bring herself to send, You said you were leaving her. Inside the condo, Jackson was with his wife, Michelle, and their teenage son. They were watching a documentary about Civil War battles. Jackson kept checking his phone, but he didn't reply to Diane. He had seen the missed calls. The text bubbles that appeared and disappeared. Michelle noticed the shift. Everything okay? She asked. He smiled. Just work. One of the crews messed up an install. By now, Diane was back on the road. But she wasn't going home. In Seattle, Lauren finally confronted Ethan the following morning. They were scheduled for a couples massage at 10:30, but only Lauren showed up. When asked where her husband was, she smiled tightly and said, "Probably sleeping it off." That day, she spent nearly 3 hours alone on the beach, reading a paperback novel and journaling. A staff member recalled that she asked about how to arrange early transport back to the mainland. She didn't say anything was wrong, the staffer recalled. But she didn't look like someone enjoying a honeymoon either. Ethan didn't appear again until dinner. By then, Lauren had already told the concierge she needed to speak to someone about changing her return flight. She never got the chance. That night, they were seen walking the beach together just before midnight. Witnesses said they looked calm, quiet, intimate even. No one heard anything after that. For Diane, the breaking point came the next morning. She showed up unannounced at Jackson's job site in Medford. Wearing jeans and a sleeveless hoodie, she looked tired and frustrated. Witnesses said she demanded to speak to him in private. Jackson looked uncomfortable, but motioned her toward the back of his pickup truck. They talked for less than 5 minutes. Then Diane got back in her car and drove off. That was the last time she was seen alive by anyone other than her killer. The warning signs were there all along. Lauren had stopped posting on social media 2 weeks before the wedding, unusual for someone who once shared every baked good she created. Her final post was a filtered shot of her engagement ring on a sprig of lavender, captioned, "A new beginning." The comments were full of hearts and congratulations. But her closest friend, Emily, later revealed that Lauren had called her 2 nights before the wedding, crying. "She told me Ethan had this switch," Emily said, "that he could go from affectionate to cold in a second. That sometimes she'd wake up and find him just staring at her like she was a stranger. But then he'd act normal again, and she'd feel crazy for doubting him." As for Diane, her oldest daughter recalled a night in June when her mother came home with a bruise on her shoulder. "She said it was from a cabinet door," the girl said. "But she didn't look me in the eyes when she said it." Paul Monroe, Diane's husband, later admitted that they had been sleeping in separate rooms for months. He had suspected the affair but didn't confront her, out of fear. "I didn't want to know how far it had gone," he confessed to police. "Because then I'd have to do something about it." On July 10th, everything came crashing down. At Everwind Cay, a staff member tried to deliver breakfast to Villa No. 9. No one answered the door. The "Do Not Disturb" sign was still hanging. By noon, the resort manager authorized the butler to use the spare key. What they found changed the island forever. Back in Oregon, Diane's car was found parked behind a chain of abandoned cabins near the edge of Bald Butte National Forest. Her purse was missing. The driver's seat was pushed back farther than usual. Her phone was left in the center console, wiped clean. 2 days later, a drone operator stumbled on the clearing where her body lay, hidden under a thin layer of pine needles, her hands and feet gone. By then, it was too late to ask the right questions. Too late to notice the subtle changes in behavior. The controlling glances. The tension beneath the surface. Too late to realize that the people who seemed the most loving could also be the most dangerous, once no one was watching. What started as passion had become manipulation. What looked like affection was control. And what seemed like silence was really just fear, too loud to speak, yet too quiet to be heard. By the time the police arrived at Villa No. 9, the sun had begun to set over Everwind Cay, casting long shadows across the shoreline. What should have been another quiet island evening turned into a full-scale investigation. Yellow tape cordoned off the villa. Guests were instructed to stay in their suites. Helicopters were dispatched from Miami. Inside the bathroom, the scene was grisly. Blood had dried along the porcelain tile floor. A mirror above the sink had shattered, its sharp edges reflecting fragments of the horror that had taken place. A toilet lid, heavy ceramic, cracked in two, lay beside the body of Lauren Kim. Her injuries were extensive. Facial trauma, a fractured skull, broken fingernails, signs of struggle. The medical examiner would later confirm blunt force trauma to the head as the primary cause of death. She had fought back. Her phone was on the nightstand, untouched. Ethan McConnell's phone was found in a drawer. His wedding ring had been placed beside it, neatly, deliberately. But Ethan himself was gone. The security team had combed the island. No sign. No witness had seen him board a boat or use the private dock. The island was only accessible by one supply boat a day, and it hadn't left. Then a local islander named Tomas Velez radioed from a neighboring cay. He had found a man wandering barefoot near the mangrove forest, sunburned and disoriented. The man had bruises on his arms, scratches on his legs, and no shoes. He claimed to have kayaked from another island at around 2 a.m., but there was no kayak in sight. When asked his name, the man whispered, "Ethan." Meanwhile, in Oregon, the investigation into Diane Monroe's disappearance had grown cold, until a series of anomalies in Jackson Reese's behavior reignited suspicion. Just days after Diane's body was discovered near Bald Butte, Reese attended a real estate fundraiser in Portland. Photos posted on social media showed him smiling, drink in hand, his arm around his wife. In one shot, a faint red mark could be seen near his collarbone, too wide for a scratch, too thin for a bruise. It was his wife, Michelle, who finally broke the silence. She had grown suspicious of her husband's late nights and vague answers. But it wasn't until she found Diane's earring beneath the passenger seat of Jackson's car that her doubts crystallized into something darker. She contacted a friend, an attorney, and together, they turned the information over to police. Investigators began quietly building a case. Phone records showed Jackson and Diane had exchanged over 3,000 messages in 3 months. Bank statements revealed large cash withdrawals, money that Diane had never seen. And surveillance footage from a gas station outside Ashland showed Diane getting into Jackson's car the night she vanished. He claimed she had asked to be dropped off at a friend's house in Eugene. She never arrived. Back in Florida, Ethan McConnell was brought in for questioning. He didn't resist. He didn't run. In fact, he seemed relieved to be in custody, like the weight of something unbearable had finally settled. At first, he claimed that Lauren's death was an accident, that they had been drinking, that she had slipped in the bathroom. When pressed about the toilet lid, the mirror, and the blood, his answers shifted. "She got upset," he said. "She threw something. I tried to stop her." When asked why he fled the villa, he paused. "I panicked. Why leave his phone? I didn't want to be tracked. Why take her passport? You don't remember." His story began to unravel. In Oregon, detectives confronted Jackson with what they had found. He denied everything. Said he hadn't seen Diane in over a week. That the texts were old. That the gas station footage was someone who looked like her. When asked to explain the shovel, recently washed, but with traces of blood under the handle, he said it was for gardening. That the blood was from a deer he had hit with his truck last fall. He had no hunting license. No deer carcass ever reported in the area. It wasn't just the lies, it was the confidence in telling them. Reese had a calmness about him, a veneer of respectability that made people second-guess their instincts. But the data didn't lie. His phone had pinged near Bald Butte the night Diane disappeared. His credit card had been used at a hardware store the morning after. And his boots, left in a laundry room, contained traces of pine needles and human hair. Lauren's autopsy confirmed what police had feared: defensive wounds on her forearms, a fractured zygomatic bone, and ligature marks along her neck. The injuries were consistent with a prolonged, violent struggle, not an accidental fall. The forensic team also recovered Ethan's fingerprints on the broken toilet lid. A partial palm print, smeared in blood, was found on the doorframe. When shown the autopsy photos, Ethan went silent. Then he said, "She told me she was leaving." In both cases, the timeline began to take shape. For Lauren, a confrontation on the beach, a late return to the villa, an argument that escalated past midnight. The room had been trashed. No valuables stolen. Just rage. Raw and personal. For Diane, A final visit to Jackson's construction site, a meeting in his truck, and a car ride that ended in a clearing beneath the trees, where no one could hear her scream. Both women were killed by men who once promised them safety. Both men tried to erase their mistakes, not with cunning but with cowardice. But neither escape plan worked. Ethan had kayaked drunk into open water, lost track of direction, and landed on a sandbar with no exit. Jackson had buried Diane in a spot too shallow to hide her from a season's worth of Oregon rain. The sea and the forest did not protect them. Nature, like truth, refused to keep their secrets. At first, neither of them confessed. Ethan McConnell, sitting in a holding cell in Miami, stared at the floor for hours. When detectives finally brought him into the interview room, he answered questions mechanically, as if rehearsed or detached. He admitted they argued. Admitted he drank too much. Said Lauren had locked herself in the bathroom and that when she finally came out, she tripped. On what? The detective asked. I don't know. She just fell. The photos told a different story. Lauren's wounds were brutal. The shattered zygomatic bone couldn't have come from a simple fall. The bruising on her arms, the broken mirror, the defensive wounds, all pointed to a fight. Not an accident. Did you hit her? Ethan paused. No. Did you throw her? 'Cause she shoved me first. It was always she. Never I. But then they showed him the print, his palm, smeared in blood, on the mirror frame. And the weight of it began to push in. He asked for a lawyer. The questioning stopped. Jackson Reese held out longer. He wasn't panicked. Wasn't frazzled. When investigators entered his Portland office with a warrant, he greeted them with cold civility. Offered coffee. Smiled for the cameras. They showed him texts, messages he had deleted, but they'd recovered. Promises to Diane. Complaints about his wife. Mentions of leaving town. He said it was just fantasy talk. They showed him photos, Diane entering his car. His boots, with pine needles matching the forest floor at Bald Butte. His shovel, recently cleaned, but with blood trapped beneath the handle wrap. He said it was all circumstantial. They showed him the earring, Diane's, found in his passenger seat. His jaw clenched. Coincidence, he said. The real turning point came from the women who had once trusted them. Lauren's mother, Julia Kim, flew from Seattle to Florida the moment she heard the news. When she arrived at the morgue and saw her daughter's body, she collapsed. Lauren's face was barely recognizable. I paid for that honeymoon, Julia later told reporters. I told her it would be the trip of a lifetime. And it was, but not the lifetime I imagined. Lauren's best friend, Emily, went public. She shared voice messages Lauren had left the night before flying out. In one, Lauren said, I don't know who he is anymore. He's quiet until he explodes. I thought he was just stressed. Maybe I rushed things. It wasn't just explosive moments. It was the pattern, control, withdrawal, and then guilt-tripping. A cycle Lauren never fully recognized until it was too late. Diane's husband, Paul Monroe, struggled with his own guilt. He had known about the affair. Had heard her on the phone with Jackson. Had even seen her sneak back into the house at 3 a.m. smelling like expensive cologne. I thought it would end, he said during a police interview. She always came home. But not this time. He remembered one specific argument, 2 weeks before her disappearance. Diane had said, You don't make me feel anything anymore. And he had replied, Then go feel something somewhere else. He never imagined she would. The media swarmed both cases. Lauren's face was on national news. Pharmacist murdered on dream honeymoon. Her wedding photo, her beaming in a white lace gown, was shown next to a grainy mugshot of Ethan, looking hollowed out and confused. In Oregon, headlines screamed, Missing mom found dismembered in forest. Jackson Reese's glossy business headshots were now side by side with crime scene sketches. His real estate empire began to crumble. Clients dropped him. His wife filed for separation. But even as public opinion turned, both men maintained fragments of their innocence. Ethan's lawyer claimed the incident was a tragic accident exacerbated by alcohol and emotional volatility. That Ethan had no prior violent history. That Lauren's death was unintentional. But then came the forensics. The blood pattern analysis showed splatter high on the walls, indicative of force, not gravity. The cracked toilet lid matched the fracture on Lauren's skull. There were no alcohol bottles in the room, no sign of shared drinking. Lauren's toxicology came back clean. Who was drinking? The prosecution asked. Because it wasn't her. In Oregon, police received a tip from a former employee of Jackson's construction firm. The man claimed that 2 years prior, Jackson had asked how deep you needed to dig to hide something in the woods. At the time, it had seemed like a joke. Now it didn't. And then came the discovery that broke everything open. Investigators obtained a deleted voice memo from Diane's phone. It had been auto-backed up to her cloud account. In it, Diane is heard crying, whispering, "If anything happens to me, it's him. He said no one would believe me. That I'd just disappear like last week's news." The date of the memo, 2 days before she vanished. Both cases were now heading toward trial. Ethan was charged with second-degree murder, with special circumstances of domestic violence. He pled not guilty. Jackson was charged with first-degree murder, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. He also pled not guilty. But the evidence was mounting. And the stories, once clean and practiced, were full of cracks. Both men claimed to have loved these women. But real love doesn't silence screams. It doesn't leave bodies in bathtubs or forests. It doesn't erase call logs, wipe fingerprints, or smile at galas while blood dries on your boots. What Ethan and Jackson called love was something else entirely. Justice isn't always swift. And in cases like these, twisted with emotion, silence, and calculated cruelty, it rarely is. For Lauren Kim's family, the wait was agonizing. After Ethan McConnell's arrest in Florida, he was held without bail while extradition hearings played out. His defense team filed motion after motion, arguing for psychiatric evaluation, suppressing the palm print evidence, even questioning the legality of the GPS tracking of his phone prior to his capture. But the prosecution had something stronger than any single piece of evidence. They had a timeline, a story, a pattern, and more than that, they had Lauren's voice, even if she never got to speak it in court. In Oregon, the case against Jackson Reese began to fracture his carefully maintained life. What had once been a pillar of the local community, a man who sponsored little league teams, donated to housing initiatives, and headlined industry conferences, was now reduced to a series of damning headlines. The prosecution labeled him a predator, a manipulator who preyed on a vulnerable woman in a dead-end marriage, making promises he never intended to keep, then killing her when she became inconvenient. Reese's defense leaned heavily on character. He had no criminal record. He had donated thousands to local causes. He employed hundreds. He loved his wife. But the contradictions mounted. The DNA found beneath Diane's fingernails matched him. His boot prints matched tracks near the burial site. The blood in his SUV was confirmed to be Diane's. The deleted voice memo, played in court, silenced the room. "If anything happens to me, it's him." The words hung in the air, impossible to ignore. In Florida, Lauren's trial became a flashpoint for conversations about domestic violence in high-functioning couples. She was educated, successful, independent. She had a bright future, loving family, supportive friends. But behind closed doors, something darker had bloomed. Witnesses were called. Lauren's college roommate described Ethan as quietly intense, recalling one dinner when Lauren flinched as he reached for a wine glass. A coworker recalled a bruised wrist Lauren had brushed off as a kitchen accident. The medical examiner's testimony was clinical, but brutal. Lauren's injuries were not consistent with a fall. Her facial fractures were consistent with repeated blunt force trauma, likely from the toilet lid found beside her body. The blow had been strong enough to crack ceramic and her skull. Ethan's attorney argued emotional volatility, said the couple had been drinking, that Lauren had initiated the argument, that Ethan snapped, that it wasn't murder, just tragedy. But the jury wasn't convinced. The prosecutor's closing line echoed through the courtroom. He didn't call for help. He didn't stay. He left her alone to die and tried to disappear. That's not panic. That's guilt. In Oregon, Reese finally broke. On the third day of cross-examination, Faced with the unreleased second voice memo Diane had secretly recorded, Jackson Reese stood and walked out of the courtroom. His lawyer followed. The judge called a recess. That night, Reese's legal team contacted the prosecution. He wanted a deal. In exchange for a confession and the location of the weapon used to kill Diane, he asked that his sentence be capped at 30 years, with the possibility of parole in 18. The DA refused. This was premeditated. This was calculated. This was not a mistake. And the state would prove it. Ethan never confessed. Through the entire trial, he maintained that Lauren's death was unintentional, that he had no memory of the actual moment of impact, that he had been drinking and only remembered fragments. But his calm demeanor on the stand betrayed him. The jurors noticed. He described the night Lauren died with a detachment that chilled the room. Referred to her in the past tense from the first sentence. Struggled to show emotion even when confronted with photos of their wedding, just 3 months before the murder. Lauren's mother cried throughout her own testimony, describing how she had helped pick Lauren's dress, how she had packed a small envelope of cash into her luggage for surprises, and how she had waited for a text that never came. She called me every day, Julia said. Even when she was busy. That day, silence. In the end, the verdicts were clear. Ethan McConnell was found guilty of second-degree murder with a deadly weapon enhancement. The judge, citing the brutality of the attack and the post-crime flight, sentenced him to life in prison without parole. Jackson Reese was found guilty of first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and obstruction of justice. His sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. 2 women were gone. But their voices, through phone recordings, text messages, diary entries, and the people who loved them, refused to be silenced. After the verdicts, memorials were held. In Seattle, friends and family of Lauren gathered at a small Korean-American cultural center where she had once volunteered. Photos of her surrounded the room, smiling in her lab coat, holding her rescue cat, decorating cupcakes for kids. A candle burned beneath a sign that read, "Her light was not meant to be extinguished this way." In Oregon, Diane's children, now living with relatives, were brought to the clearing where her body had been found. A bench was installed nearby, etched with her name. It overlooked the mountains she had once stared at from her back porch, dreaming of something more. Justice was done. But justice doesn't heal everything. There were still empty chairs at dinner tables. Still anniversaries that would pass uncelebrated. Still questions. Why didn't anyone intervene sooner? Why did they stay? Why did they believe? But perhaps the most haunting question of all. How many others are still living the same story, only without an ending yet? When the headlines fade and the courtrooms empty, what's left are the echoes, the weight of what could have been, the fragments of 2 lives interrupted by violence in its most intimate form. Lauren Kim's ashes were scattered off the coast of Whidbey Island, where she once spent childhood summers collecting shells and pressing them into journals. Her mother returns there every year now, sitting in a fold-out chair on the sand with a flask of hot tea, watching the waves crash in silence. She loved quietly, Julia says. And that was the tragedy, because no one heard her pain until it was too loud to ignore. Lauren had left behind a legacy that lived in spreadsheets and scribbled recipe cards. Co-workers at the pharmacy now keep a photo of her above the employee bulletin board with the caption, "Kindness you could feel." One of her former patients, a retired nurse named Helen, wrote in a community post, "I only met her twice. But she remembered my son's name. That's not something you forget." Diane Monroe didn't have ashes scattered or a grand funeral. She was buried beside her grandmother in a cemetery just outside Grants Pass, in a plot donated anonymously by a former PDA colleague. Her children, now in the care of her sister, still ask questions. Why did Mom go into the woods? Was she scared? Did she call for help? There are no good answers to give. What they know is this: she loved them. She made pancakes every Sunday. She used funny voices when reading bedtime stories. She smelled like vanilla and chamomile. She stayed up late learning how to braid hair from YouTube just to make her daughters feel special on picture day. But they also know something darker now, that love isn't always enough to protect you. That trust can be the most dangerous currency. That sometimes, the people who smile at you the most are the ones with the deepest shadows behind their eyes. Ethan McConnell and Jackson Reese will die in prison. Ethan spends most of his days in solitary, reportedly showing little interest in therapy or group programs. His last public statement came through his lawyer, "I grieve Lauren in my own way." No apology. No ownership. Jackson, on the other hand, has tried to reinvent himself behind bars. He's started a reading group, offered to teach financial literacy courses to other inmates. He's spoken about writing a book someday. No one outside is waiting to read it. But this story isn't about them. Not really. It's about what gets ignored, what gets dismissed, what gets minimized with excuses like, "she's overreacting," or "it's just a phase," or "he's stressed right now." It's about the way manipulation doesn't always come with a raised voice. It often arrives in the form of charm, gifts, thoughtful messages, and hollow apologies wrapped in emotional intelligence. Lauren's friends now speak at local workshops on relationship red flags. Her mother partnered with a domestic violence prevention organization to start a scholarship for young women in healthcare. Diane's sister runs a community support group for women in economically vulnerable relationships. Their first rule? Never ignore your gut. What these two women shared wasn't just tragedy. It was the slow erosion of self in the presence of men who presented as safe until they weren't. It was the kind of psychological violence that leaves no bruise at first. The kind that makes you question your memory, your feelings, your instincts. And then, suddenly, it becomes physical, fatal, final. But there is something stronger than silence. It's remembrance. It's accountability. It's the voice that survives, even when the person doesn't. Lauren's journal, recovered from her luggage, had a single line underlined twice in red. "If I ever go missing, tell them I was tired of being silenced." Diane's last recorded voicemail to her sister said, "I think I'm in over my head, but I'm not giving up. I just need one more week to figure it out." They didn't get that week. But perhaps, because of them, someone else will. We end this story not with vengeance, but with clarity. To anyone who hears this and sees even a glimmer of themselves in Lauren or Diane, know this. Your discomfort is enough. Your doubt is enough. Your fear is enough. You don't need bruises to walk away. You just need to believe that you deserve more than someone who makes you feel small in the name of love. Studio Microphone, thank you for staying until the end of this story. If it moved you, share it. If it reminded you of someone, reach out. And if you're going through something yourself, don't wait for the silence to become permanent.